the name of this panel, by the way, is Tools in the Toolbox that are available for people, and here we go.
Good morning. My name is Jenny Hyslop, and I'm with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Are you able to hear me okay? Yeah, great. I'm happy to be here with you today on behalf of VHCB talking about how to expand affordable housing opportunities. As some of the other speakers have noted, the pandemic has really placed the affordable housing crisis under a spotlight. We hear about Vermonters living in hotels, about communities struggling to meet the needs of people living in encampments, about employers struggling to recruit and retain employees as a result of lack of available and affordable housing. At the same time, there are challenges in rising costs, supply chain issues, and staffing shortages that add to the complexity of developing new housing to meet the pressing needs of our neighbors. The governor and the legislature have responded to the crisis by committing really unprecedented levels of funding to support the development of new housing. And we are so grateful for their vision and bold support. At VHCB, we've been working to deploy these resources around the state with the intention of jumpstarting the development of new housing. Our particular emphasis this year is on ensuring that there are new units coming online, excuse me, that will alleviate homelessness. So if you could move to the next slide. What you can see on this slide is that we've been working with a variety of funding sources since early this year, some federal and some state funding totaling about $155 million. We've committed about a third of this to date and expect that demand for these resources will continue to be very competitive. For those of you who are new to the world of these types of funding sources and are looking for more detailed information, then we will be able to provide with you to share with you today about how to apply, eligible uses. Just yesterday we did a public information session, and it's been recorded and posted on our website. So at vhcb.org you'll be able to find information about frequently asked questions, guidelines, and information about how to apply. In terms of what's happening for new development around the state as a result of the increased funding, you know, you can talk about the money in that first slide, but this is about the results as far as what's available to our neighbors. So what you can see here is just a substantial increase in new units coming online. So looking at early, starting, if you look back to the beginning of the pandemic in early 2020, and then forward to 2023, in that time period, we know that there are an additional 1,158 units coming online. Of those units, and by coming online, we mean available for occupancy. So of those units, 523 are designated for people who have experienced homelessness. So these numbers are based on the money that has been committed to date, but we know that there's much more money to commit, many more projects to come online. So they'll continue to grow over the next year or two. I wanted to take just a few minutes to reflect from our perspective about some of the conditions that lead to a successful project moving forward. We know that strong local support, and in particular municipal support, can help overcome many challenges. We know that building in places with existing infrastructure significantly reduces the challenges of development, and that sometimes tackling infrastructure issues helps to pave the path for affordable housing. We know that strong partnerships between developers and service providers is absolutely critical once the housing is built and occupied. Having a strong local housing development partner like Shires is also critical. And we know for sure that thinking outside the box and being willing to get creative and meet multiple community needs can also help move a project forward. So I'll just take a few minutes to show you some examples of successful projects. The first one here is Taylor Street. It's in Montpelier. It combines a transit center with housing above it. What was really notable about this project is that it meets multiple community needs, and it moved forward because it had deep commitment from the city, including financial support. This next slide just showcases some historic housing from around the state: Brattleboro, Fairhaven, Wells River. These projects involve the revitalization of existing buildings, typically in downtown areas and typically located on public infrastructure. And this slide shows the Habitat for Humanity project in Manchester, where people are coming together to provide the labor to create affordable housing homeownership opportunities with subsidy from VHCB. Building new starter homes is a real challenge in this market, and it's one that the Habitat model, coupled with subsidy from VHCB, can help address. This slide showcases one of my kind of personal favorite projects. It's New Avenue Apartments in St. Johnsbury. And what I love about this project is that it addresses a building that had long been problematic for the community. When the Vermont Council on Rural Development did a community visit in St. Johnsbury, the community members identified this project as their top priority to address. So they felt that it was a blight in their downtown. With the support of the municipality and the community so clear to funders, it really helped all of us to step up to the table and provide the funding that was necessary to convert this from a problem in the downtown to an anchor in the downtown. I think there's just always a story behind every project. This project in Groton started out as a vision to restore a local library. But as the community got involved and the local nonprofit got involved, it grew into a project that also created 19 affordable apartments. This slide and the next slide both are two larger new construction projects. They both brought a focus on energy efficiency and mixed income approach. Each have features like playgrounds, access to trails, woodlands, and public transportation. So just making them very livable for families. I think that, this just gives you a sense of the range of projects that might come before us. Right now, our funding priorities are very focused on projects that create new units and also have at least some units set aside for people who are experiencing homelessness. And I would say that if you have a project in mind, we really welcome you giving us a call to talk through it and problem solve together. These are our upcoming application deadlines. And a little information about where to go to get information. And with that, I will hand it over to Commissioner Hanford.
Thank you, Jenny. Once again, Josh Hanford, Commissioner DHCD. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other funding incentives that are in the state, particularly ones that are directed at communities to help support housing. The Vermont Community Development Program, and also a scattered site home repair program that is operated statewide, and then just a little bit about sort of a new initiative that we've been able to start up during the pandemic called the Vermont Housing, VHIP, Vermont Housing Incentive Program. So one of the sources of funding that we have to offer is federal. It's the Community Development Block Grant Program. It's been around since 1974. Congress passes a budget every year and allocates a certain amount to each state based on their population, their poverty rate, and one of the key factors is the age of their housing stock, because they know the age of their housing stock, it shows, the older it is, the more challenges you have around housing. So Vermont, for our small population, gets a fairly large percentage compared to other states. These funds only have one eligible applicant. That's the communities of Vermont. Burlington receives its own allocation directly. The rest is available to the rest of the state through the municipality as that applicant. So the municipality decides what are their most pressing community development needs, and clearly affordable housing is an eligible use in one of the most common types of applications we see that we fund. There is an ongoing application, it's rolling, it's available year-round, and there's board meetings staggered out throughout the year where those applications are considered. And these applications can start with the planning grant. I think one thing that's important to note with all of Jenny's projects, she showed the VHCB had those great slides. There's lots of funding in each of those projects, including, in all those cases, a community development block grant that was sponsored by the host municipality, sort of their contribution to the project. And in order to do that, sometimes you need to step back and do some planning and pre-development work. So this funding can be both for planning and implementation. It can be for home ownership, it can be for rental. It can be for the infrastructure to water and sewer. You can't build multifamily housing development without water and sewer. Those become some of the biggest barriers in places that we know we need housing if the municipality doesn't have it or doesn't have adequate capacity to accommodate more users. It's just that simple. It really is that simple, and that's a huge barrier. So this funding can also be used for the infrastructure to help the municipality put that in place. Another place we partner is with what are called the homeownership centers across the state. They cover each region, and they're often embedded in some of the nonprofit housing developer organizations. And the sort of NeighborWorks of America is a national sort of umbrella that sort of provides training and best practices and a model to follow. And what we've been doing for years, probably 20 years now, is funding a home repair program through these organizations. Vermont is a high home ownership state. It's about 72%. But a large number of those folks are low income, and their homes are suffering deferred maintenance. Broken windows, leaky roofs, failed septic, failed wells, safety issues, not to mention, goals of weatherization and, climate change. I mean, just structurally, they are in need of massive rehabilitation. But these homeowners don't have any equity in that home. They can't borrow any money. So this program provides grants and low interest loans to help low income homeowners make these needed repairs. It also provides the same sort of benefits to help with rental housing. Small property owners that own a few units in an old historic home or something, they can also come to this program and get a low interest loan or a grant to help repair those units and make them available to folks that are 80% of area median income or below. There's income restrictions with this program, both for the home ownership and the rental assistance. And I said, this program has been going on for more than 20 years, hundreds and hundreds of homes across the state that have benefited, and families that have benefited from this ongoing funding. It also includes financial counseling and credit repair, because oftentimes you have to help a family sort of repair their credit in order to be sustainable in maintaining this home in the future. There's always going to be expenses that come up with home ownership. That's part of the challenge of why it's hard to become a homeowner if your income isn't at a certain level, because you're inevitably going to have a broken something. And if you can't, if you don't have enough money in the bank, or you can't borrow it to fix it, your number one asset starts to depreciate and deteriorate, and you become one of those numbers I cited where we lose as many homes a year to disrepair and conversion as we're building practically. This COVID crisis, as we've said, have identified our acute housing problems and put it right in front of everyone. And there has been a response. To date, there's been about $818 million in new affordable housing resources put on the table from federal and state funds. About $170 million of that or so has been put towards capital to build housing. The rest is for services: rental assistance, utility assistance, counseling, support services. And that is a massive amount of funding that we've spent about a third of today. To put that in comparison, on an average year, the state has, between federal and state funds, about $60 million a year it puts into housing capital, and about another $60 million into services. So this $118 million is on top of that, those $60 million for capital and $60 million for services as an average each year. And there's a lot of things happening with this money. One small piece that we're operating at the department is VHIP, Vermont Housing Initiative Housing Program, which really is pretty simple. It's to provide a small incentive, up to $30,000 grant, to bring apartments that are offline or are so code deficient that they can't be legally rented, to bring those back online and to agree to rent them to folks that are low income or exiting homelessness. And to date, we've been able to bring about 249 units online with about $7.5 million. We have another $5 million that's going to be, the program's going to be starting back up in about another month, 6 weeks, with a commitment that everyone that participates must house someone exiting homelessness, to hopefully have about another 140 units to folks in desperate need of housing. And so it's using our existing housing stock, working in a new sort of collaborative way with property owners that have the resources. And there's some great videos out there of a few of these organizations that talk to the landlords. They talk to some of the folks that moved into these units and just how it changed their life. Our average cost is about $23,000 per unit to bring it back online. So we hope to continue this program and see a lot more money going in this area. I think the only thing that's even more impressive about the money that's already been granted is what could come. You know, the ARPA state funds, the state received about $1.25 billion. The governor asked for $250 million to go towards housing of just the ARPA dollars. Last year, about $75 million was ultimately approved out of the ARPA funding for housing. Housing for extremely low income and to serve those folks that are desperate, that are in homelessness, is clearly an eligible use for these ARPA funds. And we have 4 more years to spend the money. We're hopeful that there's agreement on putting a lot more money into more housing construction in a whole bunch of different ways over the next few years. And so problem is not solved, but there are a lot of efforts underway to work on this issue and more resources than there ever has. So in some ways we've got more opportunity now to do what we haven't been able to do in a long time. And I will stop there and turn it over to Leslie. Yes.
I had a question about VHIP. Is that money only to be used to bring existing apartments back up to code? Or could it be used to create an apartment where none exists, like in an unfinished space?
Yes, it can do that. We've had some examples. It's eligible, but the reality is those projects typically are more expensive. You know, we're only offering up to $30,000, and the first round, folks had 8 months to do this work, and so it was easier to convert something that was already set up. But we had a few cases where someone, for example, converted a carriage bar in the back of their house into an apartment that is available as long as they meet the eligibility constrictions. So absolutely.
And there's no, for the developer, the property owner, there's no income guidelines. It's how you use the finished space.
Correct. The owners of the property, they have to ask for this grant, follow the conditions and provide a match, 10 or 20% depending on which source of funding they're using. But the eligibility restrictions are about the tenant, the household that's being served.
Okay. That seems to be a very promising direction to move in for our housing stock.
I believe in much of the state, it's a good solution. You know, if you're talking about parts of the state that don't have any vacant units to rehab, it's not the right solution in those areas. But in many of our counties, we have some of that old housing stock that really could benefit from this. And it's typically in those old historic neighborhoods that support our downtowns and villages that we want to keep healthy and vibrant. We don't want to see them fall into decline. And sort of once they're gone, we know how expensive it is to build new housing. So.
And it's, I'm sorry, one more, and it's $30,000 per unit. So if you
$30,000 per unit.
Okay, so if you have a 6-unit building, you could try to qualify for every unit.
Exactly. Okay. I mean, and it's reimbursable, so there has to be justified cost to make up that, but yes.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning, I'm Leslie Black-Plumeau. I work at Vermont Housing Finance Agency. That is another one of the statewide agencies that administers housing programs, along with VHIP and Department of Housing and Community Development. We're often behind the scenes at VHFA. We are responsible for allocating tax credits and making low interest rate loans to developers of affordable rental housing. And we make mortgages and provide down payment assistance to first-time home buyers around the state. I work in a small but mighty team at VHFA that doesn't administer programs but looks at research that needs to be done around the state and operates the Vermont Housing Data website and promotes community relations around the state. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about local tools for promoting more affordable housing. Because we just heard about some great resources at the state and federal level for housing. But there is a missing piece in that discussion that I want to focus on today, which is what happens at the local level to facilitate the use of those state and federal funds in our towns. And we heard about some success stories from Jenny where the local community support and the way the local community set the stage for affordable rental housing to be constructed and some affordable ownership units, how that worked. And I'm going to show you how critical that is and how there are even additional levers that local voices can use to promote affordable housing. So I call these voices local housing ambassadors. These are people who advocate for more affordable housing at the local level, and they're critical to translating these pots of money that exist for broader scope down to what we actually see in our towns in terms of new or more affordable or improved quality homes. So a lot of us wear the hat of local housing ambassador from time to time in our work. We have housing developers like Shires. They are often the local voice advocating for more affordable housing in a particular town. Community housing trusts and nonprofits like NeighborWorks of Western Vermont, regional planning commissions, local elected officials, our planning and zoning staff. These are all folks who do find themselves advocating and promoting affordable housing of all types. But they all have other issues that they focus on in their work. So I'm going to show you why a housing committee at the local level focused exclusively on housing can be really instrumental in terms of promoting the affordability of housing in Vermont towns. And these can take the form of an informal group of residents who gets together to talk about housing. It could be a formal municipal committee that the town sanctions and recruits members for. It can be formed to focus on a particular issue, like a new housing development or a particular proposal like inclusionary zoning, or it can be a permanent committee, a permanent standing committee that's charged with advising the town about best practices for promoting affordable housing. So why start a housing committee? Just told you a few of the reasons why is because no one else really has that exclusive housing lens when they do their work. There's one town that I know of in the state that has a paid staff person dedicated to housing, but for the most part, our local officials are tasked with a broad range of issues. And so this housing committee can make a big difference at the local level. There are about 30 towns in the state so far that have housing committees, and it seems to be growing. So it's exciting to see see what successes happen in those towns. One of the things that local housing committees can do that's extremely important is define what more affordable housing means for that town. We often talk about affordable housing as a particular kind of, usually rental housing, that has public subsidies to support the development or ongoing maintenance of the property and to keep it affordable to low-income renters. So I call that capital A, capital H affordable housing. And that is really a gold standard for affordable housing because it is affordable in the long run to low-income households. It's monitored to make sure that it's maintaining quality, and it is built to high standards of energy efficiency, aesthetics, But it's a small portion of our housing stock. It's limited by the funding streams, those federal funding streams that Jenny and Josh just told you about. They're limited. We are getting more as a result of the pandemic relief packages, but it means that it is just a small portion of our housing. And there are other ways that a town can think about affordable housing and ways to improve the affordability of housing. Some towns may have enough buildings for the demand, and those towns are going to be maybe better off thinking about more affordable housing as focusing on the existing homes. How can we make those existing homes more affordable? And there are ways to do that the local committee can help with. Sometimes it's the quality of the homes, as Josh was describing, that the rehab program at the state level that's operating right now. By improving the quality of the homes in town, the local housing committee can make a big difference. And then there are towns in the state where demand is clearly outpacing supply. So the best thing that the local housing committee can do is work with town officials to promote new housing, like just to really create additional housing at all price points, at middle income, affordable price points, and even at the affordable prices affordable to low-income households. And some towns will choose to focus on all of these. So now I'm just going to talk about a few of the local levers that are particularly powerful in terms of the affordability of homes, and what a local housing committee can do in terms of facilitating these local levers and making them work as well as they can for promoting affordable housing. So zoning is one big area, and you're going to hear a lot more about this in the next presentation. I believe the presenter's going to talk about the Zoning for Great Neighborhoods program. But, and the reason is that zoning is a huge impact on the price of homes in towns. And what the committee can do is, a local housing committee can review the existing zoning provisions and review proposed zoning changes to estimate the impact on the housing supply of these zoning provisions. The housing committee can also look at the likely beneficiaries of a zoning change and those that are likely harmed by a zoning change. Because often that piece doesn't get fleshed out at the local level unless somebody takes the initiative to do that. So we did a study or a survey this summer with a graduate student of all of the towns in the state and asked them about their zoning provisions, and found a number of things, but one of the findings was that in a third of the towns in Vermont, there are no small lots permitted. Like a third of the towns in Vermont don't have any neighborhoods in them where a lot could be 1/4 of an acre or smaller. So that clearly has an influence on the price of the homes in those towns, especially if there's growing demand. So there's a lot of room for making a difference there. Another local lever is the review and permitting process. We talked about that a little bit earlier. It's such a big impact on the development timeline, and it translates to dollars. It translates directly into the price of the homes when they are market rate homes. And so a local committee can help to review those processes and streamline them and really help to reduce overlapping reviews. We did another survey this summer of home builders to try to identify what the challenges were that they were facing as a result of the pandemic. And we heard that in addition to the supply chain issues and short labor supply problems, that towns, 2/3 of the home builders that we surveyed were experiencing longer permitting and more complex permitting and review processes with their particular developments. And so there are lots of things that we can do to reduce those overlapping reviews and streamline processes. The final lever that I want to talk about was just the idea of the local control over pretty much every new housing development that does actually get built. The local housing committee can be sometimes the only voice advocating, in addition to the developer, can sometimes be the only voice supporting new housing. We often know, or we know that from a couple of studies that were done recently, that the folks that participate in local public meetings about new housing, they are usually opposing it. And they're usually neighbors, and they bring up lots of reasons why this housing is going to be a struggle for the community. But there are lots of advantages often of that new housing that nobody hears about unless there is a voice there, in addition to the developer, to point out the housing benefits for the community of the new housing. So that is a great role for a housing committee that goes undone a lot of times if there isn't a voice like that. And then there are lots of other tools that a committee can use to make a difference at the local level, having housing trust funds, promoting accessory dwelling units, inclusionary zoning, and really just looking at the town's unique needs and identifying what are countermeasures to help with those. So now the fun part. I get to tell you a little bit about some tools and resources that are available for work at the local level.
Leslie, I'm sorry, can you go back to that slide and talk about 1 and 2 a little bit?
Yeah. Housing trust funds are becoming more common around the state, and they're usually the work of a local housing committee who proposes the housing trust fund. They can be funded in a number of ways. Burlington's had one for a while, and it's got a set funding stream. I work on 2 different local housing committees in Chittenden County where I live. And both towns have a housing committee, have a housing trust fund. The nice thing about housing trust funds, they are a source of funding that the housing committee in the town can dedicate to a variety of different needs that the town determines are high priority.
How are those trust funds funded?
Yeah, it's a great question. So towns are trying to be creative and have proposed a number of different ways that they can be funded. The towns that I work in, South Burlington, is funded just kind of doesn't have a secure funding stream. They have been lucky enough to have an annual appropriation from the general fund by the city council each year. So they've allocated a small amount each year. We're thinking about proposing, a penny on the property tax to fund our housing trust fund. So those are some of the options that I've heard of towns using. But I'm going to tell you about a resource where there are examples and links to towns that are using housing trust funds so that if that's something you're interested in, you can learn more about what towns are doing in that regard and how they may be funding them. Because that's not they're used in Vermont, but they're also used around the country. So in this, accessory dwelling units is another great local option, and those can be promoted at the town level. A town could decide to offer some low interest rate loans to help low and moderate income homeowners create accessory dwelling units, or they could provide a grant program for accessory dwelling to help construct accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units are like a mother-in-law apartment. It's advantageous in many, many parts of the state because it creates an additional home, and we know how much we need additional homes in most of the places that we all live. And it brings some income to the homeowner, so it can be really a win-win tool. But all of these tools are described in this Housing Ready Toolbox, which is on the Housing Data website. The Housing Ready Toolbox is a collaboration of VHFA and the Department of Housing and Community Development and the Vermont Fair Housing Project and Thriving Communities Project. representatives from those 3 agencies got together and we created this website that includes links to a lot of different resources about these tools and about places that are using them so that we can benefit from the best practices that other towns are using and learn from their lessons. Oh, it also has information on how to get started as a housing committee because a lot of us have been through this before, and so there are some steps that have worked to help get a committee started in Vermont towns that might be helpful. Also, there's, Josh was referring to this earlier in terms of the building permit data. There is a lot of information available in the community profiles side of the Vermont Housing Data website. And it's really helpful if you're just getting started at the local level to look and see who's living here now, what is our housing stock, how many people are living and working here, what is the price of homes here, how is that compared to what it was 10 years ago, what are rents like here. All of the latest information, including 2020 census population data, is available in these community profiles at the town, village, and county levels. And there's also a link to information about all of the capital A, capital H housing around the state. So you could look to see in your own town, what do I already have in terms of publicly subsidized rental housing for low-income residents. And VHFA has also made a few more sources of information that might be helpful available. One is this recent initiative. We started to create housing videos, Housing 101 videos, and they feature our executive director, Maura Collins, but they are meant to tackle different issues that are of interest in Vermont communities in terms of understanding the housing market and housing issues. And then we also have a pretty active VHFA News blog and a lot of articles in that area are about local tools and sources and what's going on in neighboring towns. RPCs have also gotten a lot more active in terms of helping local housing committees. In Chittenden County, there is a regular housing convening, which is so helpful because the 17 towns that are in the county, representatives from each town participate, and they talk about usually a central issue, but then we talk about what is going on in our towns. And we are able to learn from each other and collaborate on certain initiatives. The Upper Valley also had a really successful initiative led by the RPCs, which is that Keys to the Valley initiative, which is a treasure trove of information about the people and homes and housing needs in the Upper Valley and tools available to help meet their needs. So we've learned about housing committees and what a difference they can make at the local level, and about some of the tools that can help local housing ambassadors advocate for affordable housing, and that you can go anytime to housingdata.org or your local RPC and probably find a lot of information that might help you. So thanks so much.
Happy to take some questions.
Hi, this has been great. I have a question from another angle. How to get the perspectives and voices of the lack of a better term, client population integrated into this. These presentations and this room is from the perspective of policy, developers, owners, and media. There may be some aspiring renters and owners in here. I don't know, maybe we can hear from them. But it's something we bumped up in our town energy committee, is we have all these great ideas and we think they're good, but we've struggled, even in a small town, to figure out how do we appropriately get in touch with the people who most would benefit from energy efficiency in their homes, translate that also to the housing. Perhaps that's already been marbled into the work that you've done and comes out in these results. But if each or any of you could talk about how are the voices of the people, be they minority communities or just the poor people, in both senses, who don't have the time to come and spend a session like today, to find out about it, to feel like they're not going to get into something that's going to sink them deeper into debt. It sounds like a great scheme, but there's this other thing. In these kinds of conversations locally, I encounter a lot of skepticism around anything coming from the state or the federal government or the town government. If you could talk about your experiences of how, as a town, we could address that. Thanks.
I mean, sure, I'll start. Many of these programs have a public participation sort of process to develop plans that are built into collecting data and then the solutions. I know in our funding from Department of Housing and Urban Development, we have a very specific public participation plan that includes, an outreach sort of component. It includes, representatives from protected classes and organizations on a committee that sort of they get to be the final sort of voice to approve the plan to provide funding to address affordable housing, fair housing, other benefits that are supposed to benefit low to moderate income people. Our HUD funding has a requirement that every year a minimum of 70% of the funding directly benefits low and moderate income people, and those beneficiaries are tracked. The actual people benefiting to prove that the funding went to where it was supposed to go. But those participation processes aren't perfect. I think that actually during the pandemic, it's improved because instead of having a location you're supposed to come to, we've been able to do, everything hybrid and virtual, and you see folks that are able to participate for, 1 free hour they have. I think what we hear is pretty common that, folks want to have a fair shot at housing. They don't want to, be segregated out in any way if they can. And if we're going to do programs that help people at least get into home ownership, they want to be able to build wealth. And they want this to be a stepping stone, sort of for, the quote, American dream, right? And I think that there's a lot more creative outside the box solutions we can do there. There are some ways I think we can help people, purchase first generation home purchase, first time Vermont home purchase. But the homes that folks are going to be qualified for from their income are in need of repair. So we need to bring a repair loan to go with it, or a repair grant. And we have some proposals last year that through the governor's budget that we asked for something like this called a purchase and rehab grant program to help first generation home buyers and really market it to those that haven't traditionally participated in Vermont's high ownership rate. We have a great ownership rate, but not in the BIPOC community, and others haven't enjoyed that. And so we need to target that community with sort of special initiatives. But what we've heard loud and clear is folks that those programs are being targeted towards want them to be something that they can generate wealth that lasts and they can pass on. They appreciate affordable housing, but they want a stepping stone as well. And so I've heard that loud and clear in some of the new initiatives we're talking about.
And if your question is really about practically, sort of the practical matter about how do you get those voices at the table, I think an example is that VHFA and VHCP right now are working together on an initiative where we're evaluating how to ensure that services are provided well in housing, particularly for people who have experienced homelessness. And what we learned in that process is that if you want to hear the voices of the beneficiaries, you need to make it very easy. You need to make sure there's a child care available for people to participate. It's great if there's food available at a gathering. It's good if you can provide a modest incentive. You know, if we show up for a meeting like that, we're being paid, but we're asking beneficiaries to donate their time. So sometimes a modest incentive can help ensure that that happens. So just kind of sort of practical tips in that process.
Yeah, we've struggled with that quite a bit. I feel that question was just resonated so much with me, particularly in my work at the local level, because I do see the same faces in all of these public meetings, and the committees even are the same. There's a lot of similarity among the members of our local housing committees in some towns. And so the only thing that I think has worked a little bit is when there are openings on committees, trying to recruit from the broader community by publicizing that there are openings on the Energy Committee, on the Housing Committee, in Front Porch Forum or in the local town paper, and really encouraging people and connecting with anybody that you hear of who might be interested, who hasn't been involved yet, so that you can get some new voices. We actually extended the age requirement for being on a committee in South Burlington because there was a student in the high school who was so interested in serving on the Affordable Housing Committee, and she's an amazing resource. And students are actually have a little more time. Their parents are working, but the students have a little more time. So I think just try to think as broadly as you can about how to be as inclusive as possible on these on local committees can be really helpful, but it's super hard.
Thanks. That was a great question. And another question?
Good morning, Bill Drudzik from Manchester. Thank you for doing this. A couple of comments and then followed by a question. You spent a fair amount of discussion here talking about permitting and how the local housing committee can get involved, and that's very appropriate. But my experience has shown recently that the largest issue is permitting on the state level, which particularly through Act 250 and the A&R, which bogs down the permitting process tremendously. Doing reviews that are done on the town level and approved by the town level, and forcing developers to repeat the process, and then adding a multi-$1,000 fee on top of that per household. And so there's larger statewide issues I think and legislators are here have to look at, and along with that to help facilitate housing, that the process itself is bogging down. So that's a comment. A question here is, I am getting the picture that most of the housing discussion here is around rental housing, and rental housing that is serving, let's say, lower income part of the population. But we have a huge donut hole that I'm not hearing that about, and that's transitioning from rental housing into ownership for people. And is there any help in that regard? Because today, while we have a high ownership level, the entry level into ownership housing is very challenging today, and become particularly more so in the last few years. And what's on the docket, or what is there available to help that donut hole? And that's a particular interest for businesses. Businesses that are trying to recruit people to work here in the state to fill middle-level management jobs and technical jobs is very difficult because of that particular issue. A lot of people have rented housing, want to transition, particularly with families, into ownership housing, and we don't see, or I'm not aware of programs that help those people.
Sure, I'll take the first stab. I think your comment and your question are related. We were talking a lot about local issues, and I think as the day goes on, and certainly at the end, I think we're going to talk about more, statewide permitting and regulations. One statistic that's out there is that nationally, and I bet in Vermont it might even be higher than this, but nationally, 25% of a cost to build a new house is related to permits and regulation. So that gets passed on to the buyers, who can afford to pay 25% more when they can barely get into a starter home? People that are wealthy that can build a bigger home. And those permits and those regulations, you know, they don't really stop you from doing what you want. So we have an issue, I believe, at the statewide level with needing to be more pro-housing development, and some of the aspects of Act 250 that slow or stop development. You know, if you plan to build more than 8 units of housing with Act 250, you have to trigger that permit, which is, as you said, many thousands of dollars, and then, you know, anyone that's nearby can appeal it. And so we believe there's work to do there in a smart way, not compromising Vermont's, environment. There are places in our state that are already developed, that already have the infrastructure, that we should be welcoming housing and not having another barrier to building it, in my opinion, which is cost and appeal and time and effort. It should be waived, and there's been proposals, certainly from the governor, for many year after year to sort of work on this, and hopeful that we'll get there. On the missing middle, you're right, and that's what I talked about, a market failure. There are not federal programs that subsidize the building of middle-income housing, home ownership. You know, we have targeted our resources to building housing for those that are the lowest income, and particularly rental, and you know, both the building side with low-income housing tax credits and other federal programs, and then rental subsidies. There is not a federal program to help build entry-level home ownership, and this is the missing middle. And I hear every day stories from employers and others that say, wait a second, we both have college degrees, we work full-time in Vermont, and we can't afford to become homeowners. This isn't going to work for us. And so we have to come up with some of our own solutions. I think the state's going to have to put some of its money in a competitive environment in to incentivize this, some sort of way to subsidize that cost, that risk, and the barriers that are in the way to get more of this housing that used to be built, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that was entry level, the small ranch homes, even parts of Vermont I've grown up in. What was built in the 80s as second homes, modest second homes, have become the workforce housing in those communities. They were built before those developments would have not been permitted, from what I've seen. And so we have to retool our whole views around this issue, I think, and be pro-housing development in order to solve some of this problem.
I just wanted to encourage, despite the influence of the state regulations on the resulting purchase price, there are things that can be done at the local level to improve the production of housing at all price points, which will help address the lack of housing affordable at middle incomes. Because right now, in some communities, there's a lot of stagnation. There's not a lot of homes that sell each year. Because there's not anything to move into. So if you want to stay in town, you might just stay in your house because there aren't many other options. And when home building stagnates, then everything stagnates, and what might be affordable. I've never lived in a new home because I was able to buy my home from the buyer of the new home, because they were able to move up into another home that was built in the community. But when home building is suppressed, that stagnation that occurs can really affect folks in the middle income price range the most. And so anything that we can do at the local level to kind of free up the market in terms of home building in smart locations where there's infrastructure is a really great advantage, in my opinion. Thank you.
Hi, Gina Cook again, National Meeting for Bill. That was a wonderful segue, and I appreciate that. We do have programs. For instance, me being a BIPOC, typically we have a less than 25% home ownership rate here in Vermont. So that means 75% of the rental capacity is BIPOC, or at least that's what these statistics are showing. And so I have a unique lens, and what I'm finding is the alarming lack use of the Section 8 mortgage program. It's like we want to keep people perpetually renters here in Vermont. And, that's profiteering in my mind on people. So if we're moving them into rental housing, there's no way to build generational wealth. So, this is a huge long-term problem that we're going to keep creating. So I would like to see the state move more people out of rental housing using the Section 8 program. There's a lot of funds there, they're just not being used. And in combination with all the other incentives that you were talking about, we could move people into their own homes, smaller costs, smaller homes, buy the land. It's all available. We just don't have the leadership to make these things happen. So it is my goal to mention these things, and hopefully we can get some people on board to make this happen. I can see it happen. Thank you.
Just say thank you, Tina. Yes, the Section 8 program allows for mortgage payments, and the Vermont State Housing Authority runs that, and they have had some success with using it for manufactured housing that can be affordable, on owned land or in a mobile home park, because the cost of those, can be affordable and covered with that voucher. I think there needs to be more awareness of that program, and we need more supply to put people in these homes. I think another sign of how challenging it is, VHFA operates the down payment assistance program with Champlain Housing Trust statewide, and they have down payment assistance available. There's not enough homes for it to be used on. So there is a down payment assistance for eligible folks, and if we expanded that program, could we find the homes for people to purchase to use this assistance to get people in homes? We have a supply problem. We need more homes built and placed for folks to benefit from some of these programs. You're right, we should tweak and we should modify to meet the needs better and what people are demanding.
I'll just second what Josh said. I'm not here, I'm here on behalf of VHCB, but I worked at VSHA when that homeownership program started. It's a beautiful, elegant solution, and it really helps to transition people into a wealth building situation with a lot of stability. But if there isn't stock available for them to purchase, it doesn't work. So that's really our barrier in Vermont.
We actually do have time for one more. Go ahead.
Thank you. I actually just wanted to make a comment. My name is Katie Ballard. I'm the chair of the Essex Housing Commission, and I am also somebody who has experienced homelessness and struggles at times with paying their rent. And I just wanted to say, one, thank you, Leslie, for making the comment about including those people when there are vacancies. The way to bring those people, and I say those people very, very broadly, the way to bring people in is to be inclusive and welcoming and thoughtful of the language we use when we are talking about them. If you're talking about things in stigmatizing ways and using language that as somebody who is living that experience, you are sitting there feeling shame, or you are feeling embarrassed, or you don't even understand the process because nobody's acknowledged you in the room or explained it to you or given you an opportunity to even be welcomed and be part of the community. We as people who are involved in housing especially have a responsibility to make sure that we are being thoughtful about what words we're using, because at the end of the day, everybody is human. Everybody has bad times. Everybody experiences things that are challenging. And people who experience poverty or financial struggles don't deserve to not only feel shame, but not able to be at the table when they're discussing things. So I just want to encourage everybody, as people who are involved in housing, to be thoughtful of the words we're using, to be willing to lean in and hear that feedback from people and say, okay, maybe I said it wrong. What words can I use, or what does feel more comfortable? And make sure that the process for getting on those boards or getting those applications in is not stigmatizing in itself and creating a further barrier for those populations. Thank you.
Thank you.